Okay, well, hello everyone. Welcome to another apologetics video. This one's yet another book report video. I haven't had one of these for a while, but this has been in my head for a reasonable amount of time. Just haven't had time for an extra video lately. But a few months ago, I finally made the time to purchase a copy and read The Neverending Story. And I very highly recommend it if that is your sort of thing. So, like most people born in the 80s, I watched this movie when I was a kid. I think I probably watched it the year it came out. And I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. Some scenes in that movie were truly haunting and memorable. I use haunting in a good way. In a recent Sunday homily, this one probably isn't quite online just yet, but I asked the question very passively. It wasn't directly related to my point, but what was the first movie that messed you up as a kid? I was basically making the argument that a lot of people would answer Bambi or Old Yeller. For me, it was Ghostbusters. I was way too young to watch that movie in the theater when it was out. But I was talking about that message to a few friends. We were just hanging out on a Friday night or whatever. And one of my friends, hands down, didn't need time to think about it. He said the first movie that messed him up as a kid was The Neverending Story. To be precise, The Swamp of Sadness, where Artax the horse is like just sinking into the mud. And although that can be, a terrifying image for a lot of people, especially if you're a young kid when you're watching that for the first time, I feel that because a 40-year-old man said hands down that was the first piece of cinema that really ingrained in his memory, that's a testament to just how well done that movie is. Well, fast forward many, many years after my childhood, I stumbled on the fact that it was a book before it was a movie. It never occurred to me, honestly, that it was a book. Probably could have figured that out myself, but it just never occurred to me. Saw the movie when I was a kid, totally forgot about it after that. I probably didn't watch the movie at all during my 20s and 30s. But I was reading an article, and it was one of those top 10 movies adapted from books where the movie was hated by the original author of the books. A fun little article, and the top of the list, as probably a lot of you might guess, is Mary Poppins, which I also read after reading that list. Mary Poppins, very easy, very, very charming books to read. I think there are technically more than the original 4, but basically if you read the first 4, you've read Mary Poppins. Do recommend these. You can take care of one of these books in a couple of days. Very, very easy reading. But to my surprise, another movie that was on that list was The Neverending Story. So I put it on the list for books to read one day, and I finally got around to it a few months ago. And I got a hardcover copy just for good measure because I knew this was going to be a special experience, again, because a good chunk of my childhood is wrapped in this book. So I read it, and I loved it. I loved it. I have 2 theories, which I'll get to later on, about why the author, Michael Ende, he's German, my apologies if I pronounced that name incorrectly. I have 2 theories about why he hated the movie. I'm going to get to that a little bit later. But what you may not know is that this book is divided into 2 parts. So give me 1 second here. So basically, the first part of the book is give or take about 170 pages, and then part 2 is a little longer at about 200 pages. The first part of this book is very different from the second part. The first part of the book is the first movie, and it's a fairly typical fantasy story all in all, although it certainly has its mark of originality and creativity. But if you read the first half of this book, it is very likely going to fit in with your expectations of a young adult fantasy novel. I think a lot of people read the second half and, finished the book and were thrown off by the book's second part because it's not at all like the first part. When a lot of people read a book that is divided into part 1 and part 2, they expect part 2 to be more of the same. They expect the majority of a book to be largely on the same wavelength. The Neverending Story doesn't really fit that. The second part of the book is very different from the first part, and I understand why that would throw some people off. But I actually think it's part of what makes this book so brilliant. Part 2 is not more of the same. Part 2 is the logical consequence of part 1. Oh, and by the way, the second movie is the second movie is wildly different from the part 2 of the book. So I recommend you completely forget about the second and certainly the third movies if you want to have any connection between the movie and the story. The first movie is pretty faithful to the first half of the book. Second movie, I can't in good conscience say that in the same way. Basically, getting into the basics, the first part of the book / the first movie is simply, it's a boy named Bastian reading a fantasy book which is somehow affecting reality. Like he's literally reading himself reading the book in the book. And the book addresses the idea that the world of fiction, it's called Fantasia in this book, that the world of fiction and imagination is directly related to the thoughts of real human beings. And when we nurture our appreciation for storytelling, our souls are happy and healthy. When we stop believing in stories, we paradoxically stop believing in truth and we become slaves of lies and falsehood within us. And if you think about it, that's practically the opposite message you'd expect. But I love it. I love the fact that fiction and storytelling, they're things that we need as people. And if we starve ourselves of those stories, our souls will suffer as a result. And I can say with certainty, a sick soul is one that is easily seduced by falsehood. So part 2 is when the boy Bastian finally, he accepts the story and he enters into the world of Fantasia. If you've seen the movie, you kind of know where that's where it's going. The movie does drop the ball in that, by the way. The ending of part 1 of the book is a lot more elegant and it makes a lot more sense. The movie takes liberties to make it comprehensible as a movie, I think. But in any event, the end of part 1 in the book made a lot of sense to me. At the start of part 2, Bastian is now not only in the never-ending story, he literally has the power to do whatever he wants, and he can create anything that he desires. He is essentially the god of Fantasia at the beginning of part 2. And it's a very well-written beginning of part 2 because he does what most of us would do in that situation, especially if we were a young boy and, vulnerable to boyhood temptations. The first thing he does is he creates a new magical land, in his case a brilliant glowing forest, followed by an equally colorful desert. And then once he kind of dabbles in creation, he begins to improve himself magically, by wish making, not by earning it, by wish making. He makes himself into a hero as he imagines all great heroes to be. And then the story's consequences start catching up to him. This is where I don't want to get into spoilers or anything. I want to keep things vague. Everything up till now, you can afford a little bit of harmless review from me. At this point, I don't want to say anything concrete because I actually do recommend that you just read this book. Everything before this moment, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty obvious by the movie. You could guess it. But once you get into the real plot of part 2, you won't really know what happens step by step, what happens next. And my appreciation of the book is this. Part 1 is the introduction of a fictional world, the Neverending Story. It explains the rules. It explains why Bastian is necessary for the world. This is all excellent storytelling, fairly basic storytelling, but very well done. It shows Bastian struggling to believe in the role that is his. Again, classic young adult fiction. Part 2 illustrates what it might be like to have God-like power over an entire world and what consequences might result from that power. And believe me, it's killing me that I'm not giving examples and illustrations because I can't bring myself to spoil it for you. Once you hear it from me, it'll lose the magic. And if you're reading this as an adult, the magic of the brilliance of storytelling, it'll kick in when part 2 really gets going. Unless, of course, you've never seen the movie and all of this is new, in which case, Godspeed. Enjoy the book for the first time. You only get to do that once after all. And this also means, this is also a big advantage to enjoying this book, it has a totally unpredictable ending by nature, by which I mean, when you really have no idea what will happen next in a book, you do not know what ending the author is traveling towards. This book might have a garden variety young adult fantasy ending. That is absolutely possible. This can also have a tragic ending, and the book could ultimately be a cautionary tale, like the original fairy tales. All I will say is this. The ending is a fitting one. Because remember that a good ending is not necessarily a happy ending. This book has a good ending. And you get no other hints from me other than that. So let me crack open this book a little bit and let me show you kind of where my thoughts are lying when it comes to some of the specific text. So here we go. Okay, so let's crack open the pages a little bit here. So I bookmarked a couple pages that were worthy of our attention. So first of all, the book is just very beautifully written. It's got this lovely burgundy text for everything that's happening in the Neverending Story, and they have light lime green text for things that are happening to Bastian in the real world. So very pleasurable, book to read just in terms of the text and the color. I kind of wish more books would do that somehow because it keeps it fresh on your eyes. So one thing here, Orin gives you great power. That's the gem thingy that Atreyu was wearing throughout the movie. Gives you great power, but you must never use it. For the childlike Empress herself never makes use of her power. You must go unarmed. You must let what happens happen. Everything must be equal in your eyes, good and evil, beautiful and ugly, foolish and wise, just as in the eyes of the childlike empress. You may only search and inquire, never judge. So that's a really good example of the nuance in the book that you probably don't appreciate in the movie. You know, I mentioned at the very beginning of the video that there are basically two theories, at least in my head, for why the author didn't like the movie. And the first is that the ending of the movie is completely different from the end of part 1 in the book, and that part 2 is just not there. He probably knew that the story is, too thick for a single movie, so I don't think that caught him by surprise. But the other theory is that there is just so much more that's going on within the story that the movie cuts out, as faithful as they did some scenes, like the gnomes and with the gate and the sphinxes and all that. Oh, I think that part of the movie did it perfectly. Again, the Swamp of Sadness with Artax, beautiful. But there is so much of this story that just didn't make it on the screen. And I know that's normally how it goes with books, but my working theory is that's effectively why the author, Michael Ende, didn't care for the movie as much as he probably hoped going in. So this is what I was talking about earlier, of a huge part of what the book is really about. Gmork, the evil hunter and all of that. Let's see here. That's why humans hate Fantasia, fiction, and everything that comes from here. They want to destroy it, and they don't realize that by trying to destroy it, they multiply the lies that keep flooding the human world. The creatures of Fantasia survive only as living corpses, poisoning the souls of men with their fetid smell. But humans don't know it. Isn't that a good joke? When it comes to controlling human beings, there is no better instrument than lies, because humans live by beliefs, and beliefs can be manipulated. That is very true. And the power to manipulate beliefs is the only thing that counts. That is why I sided with the powerful and served them, because I wanted to share in their power. The human world is full of weak-minded people who think they're clever and can be and are convinced that it's terribly important to persuade even children that fiction doesn't exist. It's a vicious cycle from which there is no escape. So again, this is relatively typical subject matter for young adult fiction, but this is what I was trying to say when I said this book absolutely has its mark of originality and imagination. It is very well written, and it's not just a story. There is a message within it, and I, for one, very much appreciate that. So this is going to be my last page before we call it a day. So this is fairly, 2 more pages. This is fairly lengthy into the second part of the book, and Bastian is given his, godlike power, and it says right here, he receives Orin, the gem. Remember, they told Artax, who's from Fantasia, never actually use it. Just having it is everything you need for your quest. Once Bastian, the human, gets it, he starts using it in the way that Artax didn't. Atreyu didn't. And it says, do what you wish. So, basically, aside from creating the forest and the desert, he starts by creating himself as being handsome. It didn't bother him that there was no one to admire him. On the contrary, he was glad to have the pleasure all to himself. Such a boyish fantasy. We want to change our appearance by wishing, even if there's nobody around to appreciate us in that way. I found that very, very consistent with what most people would do in that position. So moving on to the next chapter. Every chapter, by the way, begins with another letter of the alphabet, which I thought was a classy little kind of thing. And yeah, there's full illustrations for every chapter. So once he makes himself handsome, then he makes himself strong. He was handsome and strong, but somehow that wasn't enough for him. He also felt the need to be tough and inured to hardships like Atreyu. But how was he to come by that quality in this luminous garden where all manner of fruit was to be had for the picking? He wanted a quest. He wanted something to endure and to prove himself. And the story goes on from there. I don't think I had another page here. Yeah, that'll do for now. So every page carries on the story of Bastian and the Neverending Story. And it really did impress me right up until the end. And the book is just very, very well made in terms of the illustration, the color of the text, all good things. So that's my little peek inside the book itself. All right, so there you have it. A little honest recommendation from me to you. I've explained why I like the book, and we've cracked it open a little bit so that you can see the exact text. I honestly do recommend it. It's a young adult novel, so it's fairly easy reading. I don't remember exactly how long it took me to read it, but it was a pleasurable read. And my hardcover edition is lovely. It is well made. It is an absolute delight to the eyes. Even the cover is just, I can stare at that forever. So if you've never watched the movie, enjoy every page of it. And for those of you who have seen the movie, have some familiarity with the story, but never read the book, I'm telling you, it's worth it. The first part of the book will be very in line with your expectations for the most part. A few surprises here and there, but for the most part, it's in there. But I'm telling you, once part 2 gets cracking, very good chance you will be in uncharted territory. And if you're anything like me, you will enjoy the ride. So as always, thank you for watching. Happy reading to you, and God bless.